Christmas of 2020 was the first year I didn't go home. Instead of dealing with airports, family drama, and forced cheer, my two closest friends, Evan and Lucas, and I decided to rent a cabin for a few days. We were all in our early 20s, exhausted from work, and living too far from our families to justify the trip back. The idea of sitting somewhere quiet, doing nothing, sounded better than any holiday tradition. The cabin was listed as remote but accessible, which turned out to mean it sat at the edge of a long dirt road, surrounded by trees, with a few other cabins scattered far enough apart that you couldn't see them. It felt isolated without being completely cut off. We arrived on Christmas Eve just before sunset. It was already cold enough that our breath fogged the air as we unloaded the car. Inside, the cabin smelled like old wood and dust that had been warmed up after sitting unused. There was a small living room, a narrow hallway, and 3 bedrooms. Simple, but enough. We brought too much food, too much alcohol, and Lucas even dragged along his old console. By the time night fully settled in, we were half drunk, laughing too loudly, and completely relaxed. It didn't feel like Christmas, but it felt right. We finally called it a night around 2 in the morning. I remember crawling into bed and passing out almost immediately. The cabin creaked constantly, the kind of slow settling sounds old buildings make, but I was tired enough that none of it bothered me. Until something woke me up. I didn't know the exact time, but it was still pitch black outside. My phone screen lit up when I checked it just after 3:30 a.m. At first, I thought I'd woken up naturally. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft. Slow. Not the sound of someone walking normally, but careful steps, like someone trying not to make noise. They came from the living room, right near the front door. Half asleep, I assumed it was one of the guys. Maybe Evan couldn't sleep. Maybe Lucas was getting water. I lay there listening, waiting for the sound to move down the hallway. It didn't. The footsteps stayed in the same place, shifting slightly, pacing back and forth near the entrance. The floorboards creaked in the same small pattern over and over again. I felt a flicker of unease, but brushed it aside. I didn't feel like yelling out from my room or stumbling into the dark and scaring someone by accident. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. The cabin went quiet again. I rolled over and fell back asleep. When we woke up later that morning, sunlight poured through the living room windows. Evan was already making coffee, Lucas scrolling through his phone on the couch. Everything felt normal. Almost. I joked about someone creeping around at 4 in the morning. Neither of them laughed. Evan looked at me like he didn't understand the question. Lucas shook his head and said neither of them got up after going to bed. They both swore they slept straight through the night. I laughed it off, saying it was probably the cabin settling or a dream. Then I noticed the front door. It was closed, but the locks weren't engaged. Neither the deadbolt nor the handle lock. We all stared at it for a moment. Evan was the last one to go to bed, and he was sure he'd locked it. Lucas said the same thing. No one remembered opening it in the morning. After a few seconds, Lucas shrugged and suggested maybe the door didn't latch properly, or the cold messed with the lock. It was the kind of explanation you reach for when you don't want to think too deeply. We let it go. The rest of Christmas Day passed normally. We stayed inside because the snow had picked up, watched movies, played games, and called our families. The weirdness from the night before faded into the background, something to joke about. But as evening came, I started feeling uneasy again. Not scared, just aware. Every so often, I'd catch myself staring at the dark windows. The forest outside felt closer at night, like the trees were pressing up against the glass. I knew they were there during the day, but now it felt different. Like the darkness was hiding something just out of reach. I didn't say anything. None of us stayed up as late that night. Evan went to bed around midnight. Lucas and I followed shortly after. I lay awake longer than I wanted to, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind push against the cabin. Then I heard it again. The footsteps. And this time, I knew they weren't ours. This time, I didn't try to explain it away. I lay completely still in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, listening as carefully as I could. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, not random creaks or pops from the wood contracting in the cold. Whoever it was moved with intention, shifting their weight from one foot to the other near the front of the cabin. I strained to hear the hallway. Nothing. No doors opening. No floorboards creaking between the bedrooms. Evan and Lucas were still asleep. If either of them had gotten up, I would have heard them pass my door. My heart started beating harder, not fast, but heavy, like each thump was echoing in my ears. I checked my phone again. Just after 3 a.m., the footsteps stopped. I held my breath, waiting for them to start again somewhere else. Maybe the hallway, maybe the kitchen. Seconds passed. Then a minute. The silence felt worse than the sound had. I sat up slowly, careful not to let the mattress squeak. The room was freezing. My window had no curtains, just a clear view of blackness and faint reflections from inside. I avoided looking at it and focused on the door. I told myself I should wake the others. But what would I say? Hey, I think someone might be walking around our cabin sounded ridiculous without proof. And part of me was still hoping I was wrong. Then the footsteps started again. This time, they moved. Not pacing anymore. They shifted from the living room toward the hallway. I felt my stomach tighten. The hallway floor creaked once. Then again. Slow, careful steps, moving deeper into the cabin. The sound passed Evan's room first. I could picture the narrow hallway clearly in my mind, the way the boards dipped slightly in the middle. The steps continued. Closer. They stopped just outside my door. I froze. Whoever it was stood there for several seconds. I could hear nothing but my own breathing and the faint wind outside. Then the weight shifted again, the boards creaking softly as the footsteps moved past my room toward the end of the hall. Toward Lucas's door. I don't know why that's what finally pushed me to move, but it was. I slid out of bed and crossed the room as quietly as I could, my feet numb against the cold floor. My hand hovered over the door handle for a long moment before I touched it. I turned it slowly. The door didn't click. I opened it just enough to see into the hallway. The lights were off, but moonlight spilled faintly through the living room windows, just enough to make out shapes. At the far end of the hallway, someone stood facing Lucas's door. He was tall, taller than either of my friends. Broad shoulders, thick frame. His hair hung down past his shoulders, dark against the pale skin of his neck. He wore a heavy jacket, inappropriate for sleeping but perfect for the cold outside. He wasn't moving, just standing there, inches from Lucas's door, like he was listening for something inside. I pulled back slightly, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid he could hear it. I didn't dare open the door any wider. I didn't dare speak. Then the floor creaked. Not in the hallway. Behind me. Before I could react, my bedroom door was pushed open. Hard. The man filled the doorway. Up close, his face was expressionless, eyes wide and unblinking, fixed directly on me. There was no surprise in his expression, no anger, just a blank stare, like I was something he'd been expecting to find. I screamed. The sound tore out of my throat before I could stop it. The man didn't flinch. He didn't react at all. Footsteps thundered behind him as Evan and Lucas burst out of their rooms, shouting. The moment Lucas saw the man, he lunged forward without thinking. It was a mistake. The intruder moved fast. Faster than I expected someone that big to move. He shoved Lucas into the wall with enough force that it knocked the air out of him and sent him sliding to the floor. Evan froze for half a second, shock written across his face. That was all the man needed. He turned and ran. Not stumbling. Not panicked. He sprinted straight for the front door and vanished into the darkness outside. We heard the door slam, then nothing but the wind and the distant creak of trees. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Evan locked the door. Every lock. Twice. We grabbed whatever we could, kitchen knives, a fireplace poker, anything that felt solid in our hands. My legs were shaking so badly, I had to sit down. We called the police. It took 20 minutes for them to arrive. 20 minutes of standing in silence, jumping at every sound, convinced the man would come back through the door at any second. He didn't. The officers searched the area with flashlights, but the snow was already covering footprints. The forest swallowed everything. They told us there wasn't much they could do. After they left, None of us slept again. We packed our things as soon as the sun came up and drove straight home, barely speaking. No one tried to joke. No one tried to explain it away anymore. What the man wanted, we never found out. And sometimes that feels worse than knowing. We didn't stop for breakfast. We didn't stop to talk. We barely even looked at each other as we drove away from the cabin that morning. The sun was up, but it didn't help. Daylight just made everything feel exposed instead of safe, like whatever had happened wasn't hiding anymore. It simply didn't care. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Snow-covered trees blurred past the windows, and every time we slowed down or passed another car, my body tensed automatically. None of us said it out loud, but I think we were all thinking the same thing. What if he followed us? When we finally reached the highway and traffic picked up, the tension eased slightly. Evan dropped Lucas off first, then me. We promised to check in later that day, said quick goodbyes that felt strangely formal, and went our separate ways. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in my apartment made me sit up. Pipes knocking. Someone walking in the hallway outside. A car door slamming somewhere in the parking lot. I kept replaying the image of that man standing in the hallway, facing Lucas's door, like he was deciding something. The police never followed up. We tried calling the cabin owner once, but the conversation went nowhere. They apologized, said they'd checked the locks, and insisted nothing like that had ever happened before. There were no cameras on the property. No neighbors close enough to see anything. Officially, it became a closed incident. Unofficially, it stuck with us. A few weeks later, Lucas finally admitted he'd been having nightmares. In every one, he woke up to find his bedroom door open and someone standing just out of view, breathing quietly. Evan stopped staying up late. I started checking my locks 2 or 3 times before bed, even when I knew they were already locked. We tried to move on. Months passed. Winter ended. Life resumed its normal pace. And for a while, it felt like the fear was fading into something distant, something we could reference without feeling sick to our stomachs. Then Evan sent a message to our group chat. It was just a photo. A screenshot from a news article. The headline was vague, something about a man being arrested several counties over after breaking into a vacant property. No details. No names. Just a grainy image pulled from security footage. The man in the photo was tall, broad-shouldered, long hair, thick beard. The caption said he'd been caught hiding inside rental properties and unoccupied homes, sometimes staying for days without the owners knowing. The article mentioned that in a few cases, residents had reported hearing noises at night before realizing someone had been inside. Reading it made my chest feel tight. Lucas replied almost immediately, asking if anyone else thought the guy looked familiar. No one answered. Because we all did. What bothered me most wasn't that he looked like the man from the cabin. It was what the article didn't say. It didn't mention violence. It didn't mention confrontation. It didn't explain what he did once he got inside. It just said he waited. That detail stuck with me. I started thinking back to the cabin, the pacing footsteps, the unlocked door, the way he stood in the hallway without moving. He hadn't rushed. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't attacked all of us when he easily could have. It felt like we'd interrupted something. A routine. I don't know if the man in the article was the same one. The timing and location made sense, but there was no confirmation. The story disappeared from the news after a day or two, buried under more urgent headlines. Life kept going. But every Christmas since then, I think about that cabin. About how safe we felt that first night. About how easy it was to assume that nothing bad could happen because we were together. I've learned that isolation doesn't always mean being alone. Sometimes it just means no one can hear you. I still check my doors at night. I still wake up at the smallest sound. And every now and then, when the house is quiet and the world feels paused, I catch myself listening for footsteps that don't belong to anyone I know. Because the scariest part isn't knowing someone was there. It's knowing they were patient enough to wait. For a while it was. Life moved forward in small, convincing ways. New jobs. New apartments. Fewer late-night messages between the 3 of us. Evan moved to a different city. Lucas started dating someone seriously. We didn't talk about the cabin unless someone else brought it up first, and even then, only briefly, like mentioning an old injury that still ached when the weather changed. But fear doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right angle. Mine came the following winter. It was early December, not even Christmas yet. I'd stayed late at work and got home close to midnight. My apartment complex was quiet, the parking lot half empty, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you arrived after everyone else left. I parked, grabbed my bag, and walked toward my building. That's when I noticed my door. It wasn't open, but it wasn't closed either. The deadbolt was unlocked. I stood there for a long moment, staring at it, my brain scrambling for logic. I knew I'd locked it. I always did. Twice, usually. I lived alone, and I didn't take chances. I told myself maintenance could have come by. I told myself I was overreacting. I pushed the door open. Nothing was out of place. No lights on. No drawers open. No signs of a struggle. The air inside smelled normal. Familiar. I checked every room slowly, gripping my phone like it was something solid enough to protect me. There was no one there. I locked the door and tried to laugh it off, but my hands were shaking too badly to make it convincing. I barely slept that night. The next few weeks were uneventful, but the unease didn't fade. Every noise made me flinch. Every time I came home, I paused before opening the door, listening. Then 3 days before Christmas, I got a message from Lucas. Just one sentence. Did either of you ever look up the cabin owner? I hadn't. Neither had Evan, apparently. Lucas had gone down a rabbit hole after waking up from another nightmare. He'd searched rental listings, property records, anything tied to the place we stayed. The cabin had been taken off the rental site months after our visit. The owner's name led nowhere. No social media. No business listings. No recent records. What he did find was an old local forum post from years back. Someone asking about strange noises in a group of cabins near the same area. Another person replied, saying it wasn't the first time. That sometimes people stayed in empty cabins without permission during the winter because they were less likely to be checked. One reply stood out. They don't break in like burglars, it read. They move slow. They wait until they're sure no one will notice. I stared at my phone for a long time after reading that. That night, I dreamed of the hallway again. The man standing there, unmoving, facing a door that wasn't mine, waiting for someone to open it. I woke up just before dawn to a sound in my apartment. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. Exactly like before. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, listening. The sound came from the living room. One step. Then another. Slow enough that I could count the seconds between them. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't breathe. The footsteps stopped. Seconds passed. Then minutes. My body ached from tension, but I didn't dare relax. I stared at my bedroom door, half expecting it to start opening the way it had years ago. It never did. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself out of bed. The apartment was empty. The door was still locked. Nothing had been disturbed. I called in sick to work. Later that day, Evan texted the group chat for the first time in months. I had someone try my door last night. No explanation. No details. Just that. We never confirmed anything. Not between us. Not with anyone else. We didn't need to. Whatever it was, whether it was the same man or just the same kind of person, it was clear we hadn't imagined the fear. Some people don't rush. They don't force their way in. They test doors. They listen. They wait for the right moment, when you're tired, distracted, convinced nothing will happen. And sometimes, the only reason you survive is because something interrupts them. Every Christmas now, I stay home. I lock my doors early. I keep the lights on. And when the house goes quiet and the world outside feels too still, I remind myself of one thing. If you hear footsteps where there shouldn't be any, don't assume you're alone. Assume you were just noticed.